Okay, we continue now looking at what we could call engineering issues: leadership, hubs, meeting rhythms, and money. This is presentation 5. Just to remind you, we have corresponding PDF documents that are much more thorough than these presentations on our website. I would encourage you to read those, particularly this one, because this one is pretty full of information. I won't be looking at all the information. In fact, I'll be going quite quickly. Let's start off talking about leadership. Who's who in New Testament leadership? Philippians 1:1 is very helpful. It gives us a bit of a grid, if you like, of who's who. We've got Jesus mentioned, who obviously fills all in all. Then you've got the local elders and deacons coming out of the saints in the church in Philippi. That's the elders and deacons would be the team on the inside. And then you've got Paul and Timothy referenced, who was something of an outside team working in to strengthen the Philippian church. Let's talk a bit more about outside teams. In fact, Corinth is a very good case study because it kind of had the dream team in play. They had the Apostle Paul planting the church. He was hands-on for a while, and then after 18 months, he moved on. He maintained an overarching fatherly role in the church, and he dipped back in when they hit a bit of trouble later on. He was assisted by Timothy and Titus. They're both referenced in 1 and 2 Corinthians. We could just call them his helpers. That's a phrase that's used in Acts 19. Then Apollos, he started off as something of a teaching evangelist when he first started serving the Corinthian church. But it seems that he was increasingly received as an apostle. 1 Corinthians 3, he's spoken about in Paul in that same kind of category. And also later, I think it's 1 Corinthians 7, Paul specifically references himself and Apollos as an apostle. Then there's Priscilla and Aquila, who in Acts 18 you'll read about helping plant the church in Corinth. We could speculate that they had an ongoing role in the church from the outside. Maybe they were an Ephesians 4 pastor of pastors couple. Certainly they did a very good job in helping Apollos through and developing in his ministry. There's no, out of the 5 gifts mentioned in Ephesians 4, the one missing in this list is prophet. I think that's because they didn't need too much help in terms of the prophetic. Actually, they did, but you know what I mean. Paul in 1 Corinthians 14 helped just guide them in how to use the prophetic. They didn't need much encouragement in more of the prophetic, just how to use it in a more intelligent way. They were very eager. They just needed some help in wise use of the spiritual gifts, particularly in meetings. So how do outside and inside teams complement each other? Outside teams, translocal, hopefully Ephesians 4 gifts, will help a church from the outside with foundational issues, plumb line issues. The inside team of elders, assisted by deacons, will build on that foundation in a detailed and contextual manner. So, in our partnership, advanced leaders, outside teams, respect the local elders as the highest authority in their church, and the local elders respect and welcome the advanced leaders' gifting and input. Next question: what gift is best suited to lead a movement of churches? Well, judging from the New Testament, the apostolic gift is assisted by other Ephesians 4 gifts. Paul mentions in 1 Corinthians 12:28 that the apostolic gift is first. That's not a positional or hierarchical firstness, but it's a functional firstness. The apostolic gift is particularly gifted to lay foundations and help things get straight and clear from the beginning. And foundation layers need to do their job first, and only then do the electricians, plumbers, and bricklayers and so on come in. It's also first in the sense of ongoing leadership. When the apostolic gift's in play, it tends to open up areas, allowing the other gifts to find their place and to be effective. Together, the apostolic gift with Ephesians 4 gifts create a family, a church movement, an ecosystem, if you will, within which churches can be planted and strengthened. What if I have had a bad experience with things apostolic? Well, just to encourage you, you would have fitted very well into the Corinthian church, because they had had a bit of a rough time with what Paul referred to as false apostles and super apostles. Details not given, but they'd obviously taken a bit of a battering. They'd become disillusioned with Paul himself and with apostolic ministry more broadly. Yet Paul, knowing that the remedy for misuse isn't no use, it's rather correct use, he lovingly and firmly contended for the apostolic gift, and particularly his apostolic fatherly role in their church. He might have been tempted just to sweep the A word under the carpet and use a more contemporary phrase, but he didn't. He contended for correct use of this gift, and I think implied would be the other Ephesians 4 gifts as well. Certainly, we must not overplay the Ephesians 4 gifts. We mustn't push everything through the gift of apostle, prophet, evangelist, pastor, teacher. Things get weird when you do that. But equally, we must not abandon them. The unnerving alternative, if you do away with the Ephesians 4 gifts, particularly apostle and prophet, which today aren't as understood as the other 3 gifts, if you do away with these, then the unnerving alternative is that we're left to our own devices in terms of who we choose. What do we look for in people to lead a church movement? What do we look for in people to help churches from the outside in? What do we call them? It's rather an alarming situation if we're saying Scripture's very clear in terms of the leadership offices in a local church, elders and deacons. But outside, it's got nothing to say. No, it's got huge amounts to say. Acts and the epistles, when you just zoom out a bit, there is so much about how, it's a real-time narrative about how Paul and his particular team worked from the outside in, serving churches and helped churches move together in a cohesive and coordinated manner for the advance of the gospel, helping them to do much more together than they could apart. A related question is, well, is it okay to call the leadership of a movement the board or the team, and rather go for that than entertain or use Ephesians 4 language? My answer to that is, yeah, it's fine to do that. It's fine to use modern day shorthand phrases like board or team, so long as behind that phrase is a real integrity of Ephesians 4 gifts. And do be careful here, because if there isn't, then it won't be very long before the board starts acting like a corporate board and really nothing like a fatherly, loving, apostolic leadership team. How much influence and authority do advanced leaders have in a local church? Now again, if you've had difficult experience with the A word, this time the A word authority word, you might already be just wincing a bit. Please understand, I'm talking about loving, biblical, godly, fatherly influence and authority that works 100% for the benefit of the recipient. The first thing to note about apostolic authority is that it's invited. So the answer to this question is, as much as the local elders, who are the highest human authority in a local church, as much as that group of men choose to give the incoming leader, it's invited. It's also relational. Remember how Paul would contend for influence, not on the basis of his position, but on the basis of his relationship with them. He'd say, come on guys, I'm your father. I'm your father in the gospel. I want what's best for you. Listen to what I'm saying. Relational authority is the key thing to understand in terms of how Paul influenced churches. And there was gift in play. And you'll know from any arena in church life that when the gifting of God flows, then the recipients are much more able to receive what's being brought, because there's a gifting from heaven in play. The fourth thing about outside influence is that it's sincere. Paul made a big deal about how Timothy was genuinely concerned for their welfare, like Paul himself was. There's a real sincerity of concern. He said, I don't say it to the Corinthians. He said, I don't say these things to shame you or to tear you down, but to build you up. It's a sincere motive. Now, when you add those four words together, it should make outside influence and authority real, but loving and natural. Does invited, that word invited, remember influence is invited, does invited mean a standing invite? The answer must be yes. Otherwise, everything's a bit of a farce. I mean, if you think of the Galatians situation, they were so deep in heresy, they didn't even know they were deep in heresy. They were in so much trouble, they didn't even know they were in trouble. They didn't know to get in touch with Paul and say, Paul, we need your help, we're in trouble. But because they had previously invited Paul to have influence in their church, they could go to bed at night knowing that if they began to drift in terms of leadership culture or heresy or something, if that happened, they slept well at night knowing that they had dear brothers who were watching them, who'd got their backs. And so when they did begin to drift, Paul got involved. And it's great how he got involved. The J.B. Phillips version of Galatians 1 says, Paul said to them, you dear idiots. I like that. It's relational authority at its finest. If someone's going to call you an idiot, you want them to preface that with the word dear. And if someone is dear to you and you're dear to them, it's all good if they're calling you an idiot when you are an idiot. Relational authority at its best. So, by becoming a partner church, the local elders are making such a standing invitation to the advanced team, usually one guy in particular, usually the hub leader, although we don't want any church just to have an exclusive relationship with one person. We want that to be 1, 2, or even 3. Can a local church initiate or decline a request? So let's just, before you read this, let me just give you an example. Imagine one of the advanced leaders asks your church to help out a struggling church 2 hours drive away. Can you say no? Or what if you, on your own initiative, you haven't been asked, on your own initiative, you want to take that struggling church 2 hours drive away under your wing? Do you have to get permission? These 3 scenarios give us a clue as to how it should all be worked out. Scenario 1, Paul asked Titus to help the church 2 hours away. He agreed, all good, easy. Scenario 2 is a bit more interesting. Paul strongly urged Apollos to, in our analogy, help the church 2 hours down the road. But it was not at all his will to do that, but he will when he has the opportunity. This is great. Paul felt comfortable to strongly urge Apollos, but not to push him beyond the bounds of his own conscience. And Apollos felt comfortable to resist Paul's strong urging, but he resisted or declined in a brotherly way, it seems, because it looks like he said to Paul, but look, I just can't do it now. I just don't have the capacity. I've got to concentrate on my teenage children or our local church at the moment. But when I get a gap, when I have capacity, I certainly will do it. And then the third scenario, same guy, but now he's initiating. He wanted to help the church in Corinth, but he checked in with the brothers. He didn't just go off independently. He ran the idea by others to see if they had encouragement or counsel or if they would caution him in any way. They didn't. They encouraged him. When you put those 3 scenarios together, you'll get a feel for how we try to do things in Advance. Does Advance primarily exist to serve churches? Yes. But without nuance, it can lead to a bit of a one-way or a reductionist view of partnership. Paul, in his desire to help churches be mature, knew that part of that maturity was helping them look out and be unselfish and not just involved in their Jerusalem, but involved further afield as well. So Paul never held back in asking churches to contribute to the wider mission in a way that could have been perceived as to the short-term detriment of the local mission. So, for example, he asks Rome to help him get to Spain, even though he hasn't built much of a relationship with them. He asked churches for money. My favorite, Acts 16, he goes into the church in Lystra without Timothy, and he comes out of the church in Lystra with Timothy. Timothy was spoken highly of in the Lystra church. Maybe he was the guy who was going to take over the church. Maybe he was the rock star worship leader. We don't know, but hats off to the elders in Lystra who willingly sowed Timothy to the wider mission. You get the idea. We're in this thing together. We want local strength and wider strength. Local maturity means focusing, as is appropriate on the local mission, but also being mature enough and big-hearted enough to join the wider mission. That's leadership. Okay, let's move on now and talk a bit more about hubs. We began to talk about hubs in the second session, Understanding Partnership. Let's build on it a bit more. A hub, as you know, seems to be a New Testament reality, places emerging as centers for gospel advance. For us, a hub is a group of advanced churches partnering together to plant and strengthen churches around leadership, usually in a geographical area, such as a town, a city, a state, or even a nation. So it's a subgroup of advanced churches making the mission more accessible and more doable in their area. What kind of things might hubs do? Well, we ran through this in Understanding Partnership, the second session. So just let your eye go down the screen there. Obviously, we plant churches together, of primary importance, and then we do a lot of strengthening activities. Okay, let's move on. What characterizes hub relationships? Well, we've got to be convinced that we're more compelling and effective together. High levels of trust and real promotion of one another's churches. And then the third one is, we do stuff together, but we don't want to disempower local eldership teams, and we don't want them to check out. We want them to buy in. There's real blessings and synergy of doing stuff together, but the danger can be that a church looks to the hub for things that they actually should be looking to themselves for. We don't want that. Who leads a hub? Well, we've got 3 levels of leadership. The first one is a hub host. He will organize or host certain events on behalf of the hub leader who may or may not be resident in the hub. If they're outside the hub, obviously they'll come in for key times and key moments, but the hub host will be excellent at doing that. Then there's a hub coordinator who will do a lot more than the host. A hub coordinator would coordinate most aspects of the hub on behalf of the hub leader. And then the hub leader is recognized as something of an apostolic leader in the hub and provides leadership for their shared mission. Let's break it down quickly. The hub host, he'll be a trusted guy. Church. Administrative and hosting skills, and be open to taking more responsibility, we hope. A coordinator will be strong in advanced values, great example in that. Have good relationships across advance, and have a record of local fruitfulness. Not perfection. He doesn't need to have the biggest or the best church in the hub. But it's very difficult to do this fourth one, which is be received as something of a pastor amongst pastors if there's not too much fruit to speak of in your own church. And they will facilitate incoming apostolic input. Hope you're already seeing that hub life doesn't revolve around apostolic input. So much of it is other Ephesians 4 gifts and church to church, brother to brother, sister to sister. That said, the apostolic gift is important to keep things steady and moving forward, which brings us to the role of the hub leader. He's a 4F guy, growing, not perfect, but these 4 Fs are emerging, something of a father, a foundation layer, gifted to provoke the mission to further afield, and a producer of future leaders, either directly or indirectly working through others, but creating an atmosphere where leaders surge through. What are the goals of the hub? Think of 2 goals, okay? The first one is to provide a structure for churches to work together. Easy. The second one, it's a bit more subtle, but very exciting. It's to provide a wineskin for Ephesians 4 gifts to emerge, whether resident in the hub itself or serving from the outside. Now, stay with me. Okay, so if it is about apostolic and Ephesians 4 gifts, why don't you just say what it is? Why do you use this hub terminology instead of apostolic terminology? Good question. Glad you asked. Here's the answer. Many aspects of hub life don't require the apostolic gift. There's lots of church to church and other Ephesians 4 gifts in place. We don't want to overuse this A word. Secondly, it can be unhelpful to label things apostolic or prophetic or evangelistic, or whatever it is, prematurely or indiscriminately. Whereas if we talk hubs, then you've got a context where these gifts can emerge, but they can either emerge or not emerge without pressure. Either way. How might a national strategy emerge? Well, if you've got more than one hub in a certain nation, the hub leaders may decide to do stuff together. Maybe some moments, some gatherings, some initiatives for the good of the wider mission in the nation. That's up to them. And obviously, if that collaboration hits a certain level, no doubt one of them will naturally emerge into a coordinating or a leading role. Good. We're now on to meeting rhythms. How often do we meet? How busy is everyone going to be? It's pretty simple. We've got one main annual gathering called Global. Once a year, it's open, and we decide each year who we think it should be open to. But the groups that it's open to are sometimes just the lead elder and his wife. Other years, the eldership teams, the elders and their wives, and sneak in E+ as well. And other years, it's open to all leaders. So anybody who holds any kind of leadership responsibility in a church is invited. It's a great event. It's one to prioritize and get to. Outside of that, almost all other gatherings and initiatives happen in hubs or in inter-hub collaboration. So maybe two hubs will team up to get all their leadership teams together for an event of some sort, and so on. But in hubs and hubs working together, that's really where the action is. And finally, let's talk about money. Within the latitude provided by Scripture, we've got three guiding principles. So Scripture does give us a fair bit of latitude as to how a movement would run their finances. We've gone for the following three principles. We want churches, and as a movement, to be excellent in the grace of giving. That's a Pauline expression that he used writing to the Corinthians. Excel in the grace of giving. Secondly, we've decided to give most of our pooled monies to our two main goals of planting and strengthening churches. From time to time, we may give some of our pooled monies to relief or ministry to the poor, but we feel that that's best worked out at a local church level, or maybe sometimes at a hub level. And then thirdly, we want both local elders and the advanced leaders to feel empowered. So if the movement's asking for too much money from a local church, the local church might feel that they don't have enough money to give to places that they want to give, and they may feel disconnected from where the money is ending up. No doubt it's ending up in a good place, but it's just a far off place, and that they're not quite close enough to it. Conversely, if the local elders don't give enough to the movement, it means the movement is hamstrung when it needs to act quickly, and frankly, it can be a bit demoralizing having to pass the hat round to local churches for any initiative that we want to do. We need some flexibility on both sides. So how do we do these principles in a way that works for these principles? Well, we've got three ways. Firstly, we encourage partner churches, not insist, but we warmly encourage partner churches to be giving away 10% or more of their gross monthly income. And they can give it to whatever they like, but it'll no doubt be in the realm of planting and strengthening churches and ministry to the poor. It may take churches a while to work up to that, but we encourage them to be in pursuit of that 10% or more giving. Then we ask partner churches to give 2% That can be from within the 10% if they like. So that would be a fifth of the 10%. To give that to our global mission. And we try our best to use not more than half of it on the admin side of things, websites, any salaries, and so on. And to use the other half or more, if possible, to kind of the sharp end of the mission, actual planting and strengthening initiatives. And we empty out the excess every year or so. So we want to stay on the faith stretch. We don't want this ever-increasing central war chest of money that isn't used. We want it to be used. And thirdly, we ask partner churches to give another amount to their hub mission. And that amount's decided, worked out within the hub. Some hubs would give ad hoc. Other hubs would be more comfortable going for a percentage, maybe 3%. And remember, local elders, that when you're giving within the hub mission, you've got a lot more say, brotherly say, over where that money goes, and you'll be much closer to the recipients of that money so that it'll feel good. And I think we can be encouraged to really put some good money into our hub mission. Okay, just a few other points. Just read the big green words. High levels of accountability at any hub or global fund. We ask partner churches to pay their own way to events. If you can't pay your own way, no doubt you'll have such good friendship with other partner churches that they'll be able to help you out. Haves helping the have-nots is an excellent scriptural principle. If an advanced leader is in your local church, it would be great if on top of all of this you could help pay for his or her travel. And if they're salaried or partly salaried by Advance, we would love that local church to pay some of their salary. Please understand, the heart isn't just to skin you of bucks, but we want salaries to be earthed in relationship in the local church. And we want to keep the amount of salaries that come out of either hub or the global war chests to an absolute minimum. And we try to make all Advance events self-funding. If you don't do that, you're on a hiding to nowhere. It's a black hole. Events are a black hole. They can suck so much money. So friends, there we have it. We've spoken about leadership, who's who, and our kind of philosophy and culture. Chatted a bit more about how hubs work. And then we looked briefly at meeting rhythms and how we work the whole financial thing. I hope it's been helpful for you. Thank you.